Hi there, welcome to the Athletic FC podcast. I'm Adam Leventhal. So, David Ornstein reports that Chelsea boss Enzo Maresca is high on the list to replace Pep Guardiola, with the anticipation of this being his last season at City. It is big news. So how did we get here? Let's find out. Well, I'm joined by our football correspondent, David Ornstein, who broke the story, senior football writer Ollie Kay and Jack Pitt-Brooke. We're going to be getting the take of our Chelsea correspondent, Simon Johnson, a little bit later on in the show. But David, let's start with you. For people who haven't read that exclusive, just give us the top lines.
Yeah, hi, Adam. Essentially, Enzo Maresca is high among the candidates Manchester City are considering in case Pep Guardiola leaves the club next summer. It's a big if because Guardiola is tied down until the summer of 2027. But among people I speak to, there's a growing consensus that he could well go at the end of this campaign. That's not set in stone. And I don't think a decision will be made on his part and in relation to his situation until much closer towards the end of the season and the summer. However, City, as I understand it, are advancing contingency planning for the possibility of that outcome materialising. And within that contingency planning, Maresca is believed to figure prominently. He won't be the only possibility because there will be numerous names, I'm sure, if and when Guardiola is going to be leaving that role. And furthermore, City will have done this in the past because there was uncertainty that Guardiola was going to stay on a number of occasions before now. Most recently, the deal he signed in November 2024. And he tends to leave his decisions pretty late. But yeah, our information is that, you know, this work is being stepped up. And in that sense, it's quite significant. And also with Maresca, I think maybe that's taken people by surprise because he's working at Chelsea and he's under contract there until the summer of 2029 with an option to extend by 12 months. That said, he has admirers in the City hierarchy. He was there over 2 stints as a youth coach and then working under Guardiola at senior level. In between that, he was head coach of Parma and then he went away to Leicester and Chelsea. But you know, he does have a lot of support from what I hear. And then there's the added element to this, which is the bizarre, slightly cryptic recent comments by Maresca at Chelsea, which has cast uncertainty on his position. And he's declined the opportunity to clarify what he meant by saying he didn't feel supported. And so suddenly we have a bit of a situation to talk about.
Yeah, if it was on Facebook, it would be, it's complicated at the moment. Jack, let me just get your take on both elements of this, first of all. Are you surprised that it seems that the time is ebbing away for Pep Guardiola or not? Because we have heard him speak about sort of uncertainty over whether he was going to go all the way to the end of his contract. And at the same time, the second part of the question, are you not that surprised that it's Maresca that's in the mix?
On the first question, I have slightly mixed feelings. Like, it's, as everyone knows, speculation about will this be Guardiola's last season has really been kind of par for the course for years now. You know, he started there in 2016, and when he joined, I think the expectation was, you know, I think he'd done 4 years at Barcelona, 3 years at Bayern Munich, and so the longer he's gone on at City, the more people have thought, oh, maybe this will be the year. This will be the year. That all said, right now, City are probably in the best shape they've been for actually since before he signed this contract a year ago. And he's really he's kind of pivoted to a new style and rebuilt a new team. And I guess maybe that has left some people thinking maybe he wants to see this kind of new team through and give it to the conclusion of his current contract, which I think expires in 2017. So yeah, mixed feelings on that one. And then in terms of Maresca, yeah, I think I am surprised, to be honest. Like if you'd asked me this morning who I thought the likeliest candidates for the next Manchester City manager might be, I guess like a lot of people I might have said maybe Iraola or Vincent Kompany if he could be tempted away from Bayern Munich, or I wouldn't really be sure. I mean, maybe people will be looking to see what happens to Xabi Alonso at Real Madrid, perhaps. So yeah, I think in that sense it is surprising. But I think the reason it's surprising is not because Maresca, is no judgment on Maresca, who's obviously done pretty well and obviously has those CFG connections. It's the fact it would always be unusual for a manager to move from one Big Six Premier League team to another Big Six Premier League team. I actually can't. I mean, unless maybe I'm missing a good example, but I can't think of a precedent. Like obviously, big Premier League teams have got managers from other Premier League teams in the past. Like I don't know, Moyes going from Everton to Manchester United, or Hodgson going from Fulham to Liverpool, or Brendan Rodgers going from Swansea to Liverpool. But from one big Premier League team to another, that would be very interesting in box office.
Yeah, and Ollie, therefore, it's so intriguing that this has come out, considering what Enzo Maresca said this weekend just gone. You know, the worst 48 hours I've had in football, feeling not supported by the people around him. What's your sort of feeling on what's going on here?
Feeling is one of intrigue, really, because I think most of us are still trying to get to the bottom of what Maresca was talking about last weekend when he talked about not being supported and why it was the worst 48 hours of his tenure. Could he be manoeuvring or angling for a new contract, a better contract? I mean, he's already there till 2029, contract wise. But does he feel he deserves better, more money, more backing, more control over transfers? I don't know, but it's I'd be more interested in David's take. I think David would probably be the one who would have a better sense of whether the two things could be linked, but from a more outside point of view, I just find myself thinking, well, is this a case of the stars aligning for Enzo Maresca and Manchester City?
Let's throw it to David then, Ollie, because you mentioned it. Let's find out what he's got to say about it. There are other elements in this story, David, as we've spoken about. Those comments from Maresca. He's got a new agent. He didn't get maybe a big blockbuster contract after winning the Conference League. Okay, maybe you don't deserve it after that, but the Club World Cup, a new big tournament. Take us inside this story as much as you can.
Yeah, it's probably wrong for us to allege that the comments relate directly to interest from Manchester City or anybody else, or maybe a new contract, or maybe a departure, full stop. But it's hard for the mind not to stray in that direction and wonder what if, because the timing feels a bit uncanny. I've been aware of Manchester City having some interest in Maresca for some time, so it's not fresh, but you check with as many people as you can, trusted sources, on the veracity of that, and of course the Guardiola element to this story as well, because if he is continuing until 2027, then it's largely a moot point. And despite us having been in this position before with Guardiola, and people thinking he was going to go last time, by the way, let's be clear on that. This is not entirely new as a notion. But I personally have never had it so resounding from so many people that it's going to be the end of this season. And they are well placed. And yeah, as the story says, like outside of City on the whole, in terms of our sourcing. But you sort of work very hard in our position to gain a real broad understanding of what's happening from people who are better connected than us. And that's why the work that City are putting in is kind of advancing, because it's a very real possibility, even if a decision isn't taken until later. Look, Chelsea, their sporting leadership, sporting directors, ownership, I'm sure they're in regular contact with Maresca, and of course that would have been the case after the Atalanta defeat, which was the 48 hours he was referring to when he spoke post-victory. They had been on a 4-game winless streak. And you don't know, perhaps something was said within those meetings that he didn't like and prompted those comments. If he's not willing to clarify it, naturally the discourse is going to develop and people are going to sort of make their own judgments. It hasn't been denied that he has got some issues with his superiors, and all of the people involved, Maresca and those individuals, are free to deny it on or off the record and clarify. And each time he's been given the chance, he has only pointed to the fact that he loves the fans in his own words. So that leads us to what might be going on at Chelsea with him. We know there that it's a process-led club. The sporting directors kind of are in charge of everything in a similar way to maybe Liverpool, in a different way to maybe an Arsenal, a Newcastle, maybe a Manchester City, which sees the coach so much more influential and in a position of power. And so we know that there was set to be a review. There is set to be a review of Maresca's position at the end of the season, 2 years into what was, I think, a 5-year contract with an option to extend. I speak to people around the game who, have seen Maresca come in from Leicester, Championship club, who had just been promoted to the Premier League under him, and we didn't hear that much in the first year. And then he wins. So he picked up the Conference League, the Club World Cup. He's led Chelsea into the Champions League. And there are people I speak to in the game who feel that would have emboldened him to speak out, to be more confident, to voice his views in a stronger way than he has in the past. You could refer to it as a power play. I'm not. I'm just saying what some people may phrase it as. In and amongst all of that, in the autumn, so in recent times, as you point out, Adam, he has started working with the so-called super agent, George Mendes. Now, that will, of course, be in part designed to help, or in large part designed to help his managerial journey, wherever that may be taking him. But clearly it leads the mind to wonder if he's speaking like this, if he's making moves like that, when we know Chelsea are a process-led club, that as and when head coaches leave, there will be somebody else brought in. It's not the most traumatic experience for them. We saw it with Pochettino, who was reviewed at the end of his first season, and he wasn't continued in the role, and they made the change to Maresca. So that all paints a bit of a picture of what is perhaps going on here. And in and amongst all of that, I don't think City's admiration for Maresca is any surprise, given how well they know him. And yeah, it would be a stunning manoeuvre if, as Jack points out, a coach moved from one of the top clubs, very top clubs in the Premier League, to another. But at the same time, it says to the club that's taking somebody like that this individual has performed at that level, has succeeded in this league with high expectations. So in a way, it's a surprise that it hasn't happened more, because the proof of concept is there, in a way that it isn't for maybe a company so far within English football. And I would add some names like a Cesc Fabregas, who's turning heads across the European game and might be linked with a position such as this. A Julian Nagelsmann as well, who will be coming out of the World Cup next summer with Germany potentially. Will he go back into club football or not? We'll see. So there is some logic to all of this. A lot of it is theoretical and potential. You could call it speculative. But I guess in our position, the job is to attempt to put these pieces together with as good a sourcing as possible to present the reality of what's happening. And that's led to our story today. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot more of it in the days and weeks ahead.
Jack, Manchester City, Chelsea on January the 4th has an extra subplot to it now. How disruptive do you think this is going to be for both clubs now?
I don't know how disruptive it will be. I mean, I'm sure both managers will have to face lots of questions about this at the pre-match press conference. and it will be a good chance for each of them to show how much they respect the other one, which, managers like to do sometimes in press conferences. There'll be a lot of guys, Enzo Maresca, wow, from Pep. But I don't know how actually disruptive it will be to game preparations. I often feel with this kind of thing, like, I think in the media we maybe overestimate the extent to which like players can just stay focused on the actual football and the daily routine of training. But yeah, it will definitely dominate the pre-match press conferences.
I just wanted to throw one over to Ollie about Pep Guardiola's input in his eventual successor, because he won't be going on forever. He's already out, stayed longer than at any other club where he's coached. And he has spoken effusively in recent times, actually, of Enzo Maresca. And he has of other coaches over the years. I remember Roberto De Zerbi was one he was really fond of. And you could say that when he spoke well of Maresca, he was only answering a question, but he answered it emphatically. And I wonder if he has input into a decision like this, even though he would be the departing coach. I guess, given his legendary status, that he would.
I would expect Manchester City, a club with as many intelligent and sensible people running it, very highly qualified people, football people, running it, to steer well away from that sort of idealistic notion of manager handpicks his own successor. I don't think that can ever really work. I would expect them to, I would expect them, first of all, to have done a lot of work on this in the past. So in a column I've just written on the subject, I mentioned that at various points in the past, I mean, because Guardiola's departure has been talked about for so long, at one point it seemed like Patrick Vieira might be the sort of heir apparent, when he was in New York, then Mikel Arteta. And I would have felt early in Arteta's time at Arsenal, there would have been a time when Arteta was doing very well in terms of the building aspect, but not to the point where he was actually challenging City. I would have thought at that point maybe it would have been the right move for him and for City to for him to be the guy who would take over from Guardiola. But it feels like Arteta has now taken Arsenal to such a level that it's unthinkable that he would be that he would leave or even be a realistic target for City, because he's so committed to Arsenal. But Maresca seems, I don't know, when we're talking about Maresca, to me he would seem gettable, and it's partly because I think Chelsea are less aggressive in what they do, and less, it would have been unthinkable anybody taking Jose Mourinho from Chelsea in the Abramovich era. But Chelsea's entire model in the last few years has been about selling players, often to clubs like Manchester City, like Arsenal, like Manchester United. They've sold players to. It's if you take the sort of approach that they have to player recruitment, where they sign sort of inexperienced players with great potential and let them sort of learn on the job and learn from their mistakes and grow. What they do then, in some cases, is sell those players on. So if you applied that principle to a manager, and I'm not saying they will, but if you did apply that approach to a manager, they might well take the decision. Okay, we'll let Maresca go on, and we'll replace him with somebody again younger and more experienced, more inexperienced. I'm slightly being playful with that, but it's when Chelsea's whole model has seemed to be less about winning the biggest prizes and challenging for the biggest prizes, by which I mean Premier League and Champions League, rather than Club World Cup and Conference League. I don't think, I think a manager such as Maresca could feasibly look at it and think, well, I'll have a much better chance of success there, and the structure is better, and the players are better, and they do actually have an experienced core of players rather than this perpetual sort of jam tomorrow approach that we've seen at Chelsea.
Yeah, there are many people who are already saying Liam Rosenior at Strasbourg is going to be a Chelsea manager of the future, whether it's in the immediate or medium or longer term. And that shows their contingency plans, like all well-organised top clubs, will be in place in one way, shape or form. And I think Manchester City, it's completely understandable that you would be doing this work. It's smart. It's laudable. It's smart that they extended Guardiola by 2 years when many people thought it would be 1. Otherwise, you may have found yourself in a situation like we had with Guardiola just recently, where everybody thought he was going and it was down to the final month. Same with Jurgen Klopp after he announced he was leaving. It was a frenzy of speculation for those months in towards the end of the season. I just wanted to pick up on one thing Ollie said. You mentioned Vieira, you've mentioned Company, Jack. Arteta was definitely someone I think I heard City had been looking at before he signed his new contract with Arsenal in and amid that period where Pep Guardiola could well have been leaving. He was the favourite to get the England job. I think the FA had some encouragement at one point, but ultimately it didn't happen. He signed a new contract. They went for Tuchel. And now we're talking about Maresca. Of course, they'll have a number of candidates from different places, but I don't know what you guys think on this CFG dalliance and the fact that people they know and have worked with before and are familiar with the style of play, the system, the model, and Pep Guardiola, especially when it's going to be such an enormous departure when it happens one day, because everything was built around him. And the Catalan execs, they prepared for his arrival, the staff. In this day and age, it's maybe even more fundamental than a Ferguson or Wenger departing.
Jack, do you need a juggernaut coming into this job, or as David said, do you need knowledge of the environment? What's more important?
That's a great question. Yeah, Pep was a big gun, but Pep came into a club that had basically been rebuilt for him, and he had total control and was working with some very close old friends of his, and was able to kind of dictate everything over the course of a long period of time. And now that everything is in place and it runs basically in Guardiola's image, my sense is that you probably don't need a juggernaut. I think unless they want a big change in direction, I suspect they probably don't. It would actually make more sense to have somebody who comes in and knows the system and knows how the club operates and can keep things moving smoothly. Obviously, you can't replace that size of personality that Guardiola has, but you can, if you have somebody who knows how it all works and knows the expectations and the strengths and the weaknesses of how they do things, then maybe you can just proceed on with a kind of, what you might call an internal candidate, even though in this particular instance, Enzo Maresca would be coming from outside the club.
Well, Jack, your number is up. You're going to be leaving us and you're going to be replaced by Simon Johnson, who covers Chelsea deeply, and we'll get his thoughts next. So with us now is our Chelsea correspondent, Simon Johnson. How's this gone down at Chelsea, Simon? Maresca being in the mix for Manchester City, considering the week that you've had covering what he's been saying.
Well, what's happened, Adam? Obviously, the story that David's broke is quite fresh, but let's just say that the reaction is pretty much per my analysis below David's story. That on one hand, that he's contracted to 2029 with a club option to 2030, so Chelsea certainly hold the cards there. But also, this is the reason why Chelsea have the structure they have, that they don't have a manager with all the power. If anything, the structure is the power, and the head coach is just there to coach the team. So let's just see how this one plays out. Of course, we don't know sort of whether he will end up going to Manchester City, but given the events over the last few days, of which I've been privileged to be a party of every press conference, we have to be careful that we don't do a 2 + 2 = 5 scenario. But of course, the timing of all this will inevitably provoke speculation that perhaps this is why Maresca's been acting up. And now I'm going to another press conference on Friday where these questions will be put to him, obviously with a new change of direction.
Well, and he's been doing a sterling job in saying nothing, having, thrown a grenade into the situation at the weekend. Do you think these links and, like you say, people maybe doing some bad maths is going to make his situation quite difficult now?
I don't think it helps. It certainly won't help. Because for this reason, and look, he wasn't helping himself anyway, regardless of this great story from David, that because Chelsea's a tough enough job as it is. So, and when you start moaning about things and not clarifying what you mean, it inevitably makes people question you more. It questions how things are going on at Chelsea, the relationship behind the scenes. I mean, everything I've been told is that this outburst of his last Saturday after the Everton game caught virtually everyone by surprise, apart from the man himself. So is there an agenda behind what he said, or is it a bit like what Maresca's shown before, both as Leicester head coach when they were top of the Championship, and he got wind of the fact that Leicester fans weren't happy with his style of play, and he said, if people have a problem with the idea, I leave, and other rants that he's had at Chelsea. Can he handle a job like Manchester City if he has these kind of outbursts as Chelsea and Leicester head coach? But I mean, it's fantastic. I'm not sure it's great for my sleep pattern, but it's absolutely a fantastic development, which I can't wait to cover over the next few months, see what happens.
Yeah, I'll come back to you in a minute, Simon. But Ollie, let's deal with the question that Simon has posed. Is this a job, Manchester City, that Maresca can do?
I find it fascinating because I feel like it's we go through spells with Maresca at Chelsea where they've been very streaky, haven't they? Over the 18 months, it's been maybe 4 or 5 good games, 4 or 5 or 3 or 4 bad games, and it's been they ended up basically achieving all their objectives right at the end of last season. Secured Champions League on the final day, came from behind to beat Real Betis in the Conference League final, and then obviously won the Club World Cup, which was a fantastic bonus, really. But it was, I don't know, I feel like half the time with Maresca at Chelsea, people are asking, and people like me and the fans, a lot of the time, not all the fans, not all the time, but a lot of the talk about him is whether the club have put too much faith in him, like they have perhaps with some of the players. To me, the jury is still out in some ways on that as an appointment after 18 months. I know you can list the achievements, but I think that I don't think they were meant to have won 8 of the first 16 Premier League matches this season and be 8 points off the lead, and I don't think I think they've had their moments this season where you've looked at them. Perhaps the Tottenham match, I thought they were brilliant. The Liverpool match, they were excellent. The Barcelona match, and the Arsenal game with 10 men, you could look at those performances and think, yeah, you can really see something coming together here. But a lot of the other games, you're thinking, well, this is just still a bit of a mishmash. And although I would put a lot of that on the recruitment and a lack of real experience within the team and a lack of real know-how and character and sort of elite winning mentality amongst the players that he's got, I don't know. It would seem to me, it felt like a leap of faith from Chelsea when they appointed him, and I feel like it would be a leap of faith from Manchester City if they were to appoint him as Pep Guardiola's successor. I'm not saying he's doing a bad job at Chelsea. He's definitely not, and I think he's a better manager now and a more experienced, better qualified manager now than when he took the job.
There's also an interesting point here in that by the time next summer comes round, if Guardiola goes then, or the summer after 2027, or even beyond, City I'm sure would love to keep him. It's going to be a minimum of 10 years since Manchester City last made a head coach appointment. So it's going to be seismic for Khaldoun Al-Mubarak at the top on behalf of the ownership and Sheikh Mansour, Ferran Soriano, the chief executive, and crucially in this, Hugo Viana, the new sporting director, who's taken over from Txiki Begiristain. And obviously Begiristain was part of that former Barcelona enclave that brought Pep in. Now Viana's going to have his thoughts and his preferences in this, and it will be a really interesting test for him as well, because for all of the Pep disciples out there, and it doesn't mean that the club will decide to go down that route, and that's one of the many fascinating narratives in all of this.
And I've got one more question for Simon to end, but David, just on where this piece of the jigsaw fits in, how much do you think the 100 charges against Manchester City is part of Pep Guardiola's thinking? And I know that's going to take quite a lot of guesswork, because you don't know exactly what's going on in his mind, but it's a big thing, and it's been dominating in the background at Manchester City, hasn't it?
Yeah, the only thing I can say from all of my conversations around this topic is that hasn't come up once, the 115 charges, which Manchester City vehemently deny. We still don't have results and outcome for, and so everybody's waiting. Pep Guardiola spoke in the past to sort of suggest he would stick with City whatever, as long as he's not been lied to, and even if they got relegated or what, he was quite strong on that previously. And I guess that is the sort of cloud that lingers for the game, and for many supporters who seem to caveat much of what they talk about City with the fact that this is still unresolved. But in relation to Guardiola's future and the managerial situation, so far that is something that hasn't come up in a single chat I've had. And when you see the signings Manchester City are making, a lot of staff have left, but many have come at the same time. It doesn't seem to be, to my eyes and ears, like some kind of impediment to working for at Manchester City at this point in time. It really does feel sort of business as usual, and they can't go any other way. They're absolutely adamant that they will be vindicated, and they've got an irrefutable body of evidence. And so it just remains hypothetical whatever anyone thinks about it, and that appears to be the way that Pep Guardiola has always operated. Right now, I don't see if there's a departure being looked at for next summer, considered, candidates, a process, due diligence, that will be prominent in the minds of Manchester City. Whether it is in those are potential candidates, I'm not sure.
And Simon, just a final word to you. You've obviously had a surprising week with Enzo Maresca and what he's been saying, and you said that it came as a surprise to people within the club. What do you think's more likely now, that he ends up leaving early from Chelsea, signing a new contract, or just staying there and then being appointed Manchester City's successor to Pep Guardiola? I know they are all big things, but what do you think is the most likely avenue?
Thanks for giving me the hospital pass. I mean, I wouldn't be enormously surprised, and this is just an opinion, everybody, before everyone overreacts. I wouldn't be surprised if he leaves. I think you have to be very careful when you play these kind of games. And as I said at the start, and when I mean by games, I'm talking about the comments he made, not referring to this story in particular, because we don't know what Maresca thinks of it yet, and we'll find out on Friday. But I just think when you start sort of saying things publicly, and I refer to, for example, asking for a centre back when he's not in charge of recruitment at Chelsea. Like, everyone knows the score of who runs things at Chelsea. I just think, it feels like Chelsea could sort of say, well, we'll just find someone, a bit like with Pochettino, that the reason they moved on for Pochettino, that will sign up for the very structure they've put in place. Now, of course, there is the caveat to this argument that Chelsea will actually think, well, we are making strides with Maresca, and do we really want the possible embarrassment of him going to a rival and leaving us with a bloody nose, given that obviously Chelsea hope to be going toe-to-toe with Manchester City for major trophies. But you've asked me the question, and I'm going to lean slightly towards him leaving at the end of the season. But, of course, it depends on whether he's got a place to go to and whether Manchester City are the club that make the move for him. But he has been linked with other clubs as well, back in Italy too. So Maresca doesn't say an awful lot most of the time, which means that when he does say something, as he did the other day, you really think it's something of note, that it's significant. It's not just him going AWOL for no reason at all.
And we shall see what he says in his next news conference. It'll be interesting whatever happens. Simon, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks to David, to Ollie, to Jack earlier on as well. And don't forget, we will have any more developments on this story at Manchester City, at Chelsea and beyond on The Athletic. And we'll catch you next time. Thanks for joining us.
For more from the Athletic FC podcast, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. We've got top journalists like David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the entire season. Make sure you don't miss an episode of the Athletic FC. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts from.